In the vast expanse of the galaxy, where ancient civilizations bow before cosmic tribunals and species plead for their very existence, one world stands defiant. Earth, a backwater planet of primitive apes who somehow stumbled into the stars, has been summoned before the Galactic Court of Justice. But here's the twist that has every alien diplomat trembling. The court refuses to hear Earth's case without maximum security protocols in place. Why would a supposedly inferior species require an entire battalion of the galaxy's most elite peacekeepers just to attend a hearing? What secrets lie behind humanity's innocent facade? And why are the galaxy's most feared warriors volunteering for guard duty, claiming it's the safest assignment they've ever taken? The answer lies not in humanity's weapons or technology, but in something far more dangerous. Something that makes even the most powerful alien empires sleep with one eye open. Because when humans are backed into a corner, when their survival is on the line, they don't just fight back. They get creative. And in a galaxy that's grown comfortable with predictable warfare and diplomatic protocols, creativity might just be the most terrifying weapon of all. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood at the observation deck of the UES Defiance, watching the massive structure of the Galactic Court of Justice grow larger through the reinforced transparasteel. The station was a marvel of engineering, a crystalline behemoth that twisted through space like a frozen hurricane, its surface gleaming with the light of 1,000 embedded stars. Each facet represented a different member species of the Galactic Union, their architectural styles blending into something both beautiful and utterly alien. First time seeing the court, Ambassador. Captain Marcus Rodriguez joined her at the viewport, his weathered face reflecting the station's ethereal glow. First time anyone from Earth has seen it, Sarah replied, adjusting the ceremonial sash that marked her as humanity's first official representative to the galaxy's highest judicial body. Hard to believe we're really here. 3 years since the discovery that Earth was not alone, that the galaxy teemed with thousands of intelligent species, all governed by a complex web of laws and treaties that had maintained peace for millennia. 3 years since humanity learned they were considered the newest and, by most accounts, the most primitive member of the galactic community. The summons had arrived 6 months ago through official channels, delivered by a Zephyrian courier whose crystalline form had nearly given the receptionist at the United Earth Embassy a heart attack. The message was formal, written in the archaic legal tongue that predated most current galactic civilizations. The Terran species, known as humans, are hereby summoned to appear before the High Court of Galactic Justice to address charges of treaty violations, unsanctioned military activities, and potential threat to galactic stability. Sarah had read those charges 1,000 times, each reading making them seem more absurd. Humanity had barely managed to establish 3 colonies beyond Earth, had a space navy consisting of 12 ships, and possessed technology that most galactic species considered quaint. What possible threat could they pose? Ma'am, Lieutenant Torres approached with a concerned expression, we're receiving some unusual communications from the court's traffic control.
Unusual how? They're requesting our complete passenger manifest, crew psychological profiles, and... Torres hesitated.
Dee addressed. They want to know if we're carrying any improvised devices, non-standard modifications, or items of human innovation. Items of human innovation? What the hell does that mean? Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. I think it means they're afraid of us. The captain barked a laugh. Afraid? Of us? We're flying in a ship that's older than some of their breakfast cereals, carrying diplomatic credentials and a small security detail. What could they possibly be afraid of? Before Sarah could respond, the communications panel crackled to life. A voice spoke in heavily accented Galactic Standard, the universal language that had taken Sarah 2 years of intensive study to master. EUS Defiance. This is Nexus Control. You are ordered to maintain your current position and prepare for escort. A security flotilla will guide you to the designated quarantine dock. Quarantine dock? Captain Rodriguez keyed the comm. Nexus Control. This is Captain Rodriguez of the UES Defiance. We are here on official diplomatic business. Our credentials were transmitted weeks ago. Acknowledged UES Defiance. Security protocols remain in effect. Please comply. Sarah watched through the viewport as ships began to emerge from the station's docking bays. They were sleek, predatory craft that moved with the fluid grace of natural hunters. She recognized the design from her briefings. Kytheron interceptors flown by a warrior species renowned for their skill in combat and their absolute adherence to duty. 12 ships, Captain Rodriguez muttered, counting the approaching vessels. For a diplomatic mission. Captain, Torres called out, monitoring the sensor readings. I'm detecting more ships approaching from the far side of the station. Looks like a lot more. Brig. Sarah moved to the tactical display, watching as contact after contact appeared on the screen. Her diplomatic training had taught her to read the subtle language of military postures, and what she was seeing made no sense. This wasn't an escort, it was a containment fleet. How many? She asked quietly. 237 ships and counting, Torres replied, his voice tight with disbelief. Multiple species, multiple ship classes. Ma'am, this is enough firepower to glass a small moon. The comm crackled again, this time with a different voice, older, more authoritative. UE's Defiance. This is Fleet Admiral Zax Thor of the Galactic Peacekeeping Force. Welcome to Nexus Station. Please be advised that enhanced security protocols are in effect for your visit. Sarah keyed the comm herself. Admiral, this is Ambassador Chen. Might I ask why such extensive security measures are necessary for a simple judicial hearing? There was a long pause before the Admiral responded. Ambassador Chen, with respect, there is nothing simple about humanity's presence at this court. Your species has a reputation. A reputation for what? Innovation. The word hung in the air like a curse. Sarah found herself exchanging glances with Captain Rodriguez, both of them trying to process what they'd just heard. Innovation was considered a threat? Admiral, Sarah continued, I'm not sure I understand. Humanity has been a peaceful member of the Galactic Union since first contact. We followed all protocols, observed all treaties. Ambassador, the Admiral's voice carried a weight that spoke of long experience and hard-won wisdom. I have been a peacekeeper for over 200 standard years. I have seen the rise and fall of a dozen species, witnessed conflicts that consumed entire star systems, and maintained order in the darkest corners of the galaxy. In all that time, I have never encountered a species quite like humanity. Turned a mining laser into a weapon system that could penetrate Kytheron battle armor. 6 months later, you created a communication device out of spare parts that operated on frequencies we didn't know existed. A year ago, your colony on Kepler, 442b, held off a pirate fleet using modified agricultural equipment and what your people called human ingenuity. Sarah felt a mix of pride and confusion. Those were all defensive measures, Admiral. We were protecting ourselves and our property. Indeed. And that, Ambassador, is precisely what concerns the court. Your species doesn't simply solve problems. You reinvent the entire concept of what a solution can be. You take the impossible and make it inevitable. You see limitations as suggestions rather than boundaries. The escort formation had fully surrounded the Defiance now, maintaining a respectful but unmistakable perimeter. Sarah could see the sleek hulls of the ships, their weapon systems powered but not actively targeting. It was the posture of guards watching a dangerous prisoner, ready for anything, expecting the unexpected. Admiral, are you saying the court considers humanity dangerous because we're good at improvising? Ambassador Chen, let me share something with you that is not in your briefing files. 6 months ago, the hegemony of Taldar attempted to blockade your colony on Ross 128b. They brought 43 warships, veteran crews, and enough firepower to reduce the planet to rubble. Sarah nodded. She remembered the incident. It had been a territorial dispute that the diplomatic corps had been working to resolve through official channels. Your colony had 17 civilian ships, a handful of defensive platforms, and 300 settlers, the admiral continued. By every military calculation in existence, it should have been a massacre. The Taldare are not known for their mercy. But it wasn't, Sarah said quietly, beginning to understand. No, it wasn't. Within 72 hours, the entire Taldari fleet was requesting emergency assistance. Your colonists had somehow turned their mining equipment into weapons, their agricultural domes into shield generators, and their waste processing systems into, well, no, one is quite sure what they did with the waste processing systems, but it was reportedly quite effective. Captain Rodriguez couldn't suppress a grin. Sounds like my people. The Taldari are a proud species, Captain. They have conquered 17 worlds and never known defeat. They retreated from Ross 128b, claiming that humans do not fight wars. They rewrite the laws of physics. The incident has become something of a legend among the warrior species. Sarah was beginning to see the bigger picture. The court isn't afraid of our weapons or our military. They're afraid of our unpredictability. Precisely, Ambassador. The galaxy operates on certain principles. Warfare follows established patterns. Technology develops along predictable lines. Diplomacy adheres to ancient protocols. Your species seems determined to ignore all of these conventions and create something entirely new. The Defiance was being guided toward a docking bay that Sarah noticed was significantly isolated from the rest of the station's traffic. Blast shields were already sliding into place, creating additional barriers between their ship and the main population centers. Admiral, what exactly are the charges against humanity? The formal charges are treaty violations, unsanctioned military activities, and potential threat to galactic stability. The informal charges. The Admiral paused, and Sarah could hear what sounded like a tired sigh. The informal charges are that your species exists in a way that makes the rest of the galaxy uncomfortable. That's not exactly a crime, is it? Ambassador, in a galaxy where peace has been maintained for 10,000 years through careful adherence to established patterns, any deviation from the norm is potentially catastrophic. Your species doesn't just deviate. You seem to specialize in impossible solutions to unsolvable problems. From the perspective of galactic stability, that makes you either the greatest asset or the greatest threat the Union has ever encountered. As the Defiant settled into its assigned docking bay, Sarah could see the security measures being implemented around them. Force field generators hummed to life, creating multiple layers of containment. Guard posts were being established at strategic points. Most telling of all, she could see beings of various species gathering at observation points, watching their arrival with what could only be described as fascination mixed with fear. Admiral, one more question. How many court cases require this level of security? In my 2 centuries of service, none. The docking clamps engaged with a solid thunk that reverberated through the ship. Outside, Sarah could see a delegation approaching, beings from multiple species, all wearing the formal robes of the galactic court system. But behind them came something else. Row after row of peacekeepers in full combat armor, their weapons powered and ready. Ambassador, Captain Rodriguez said quietly, I think we might be in more trouble than we thought. Sarah straightened her diplomatic sash and checked her appearance one final time. Captain, I don't think we're in trouble at all. I think the galaxy is in trouble, and they're hoping we can help them figure out what to do about it. As the airlocks began to cycle and the first formal steps of humanity's trial began, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this hearing would determine more than just Earth's place in the galactic community. The way the Admiral had spoken, the unprecedented security measures, the careful isolation of their ship, all of it pointed to something bigger than a simple legal proceeding. The galaxy had summoned humanity to answer for its crimes, but Sarah was beginning to suspect that what they really wanted was to understand how humans had managed to survive in a universe that should have crushed them long ago. And more importantly, they wanted to know if that same unpredictable creativity that made humanity so dangerous might also be the key to solving problems that traditional galactic wisdom couldn't handle. As the doors opened and the delegation of alien judges approached, Sarah took a deep breath and prepared to defend not just humanity's actions, but their entire way of thinking. Because if she was right about what this trial really represented, the stakes weren't just Earth's membership in the Galactic Union. They were the future of the galaxy itself. The lead judge, a towering being with crystalline skin and eyes like fractured starlight, stepped forward. When it spoke, its voice carried the weight of absolute authority. Ambassador Chen of Terra. You and your species stand accused of violating the fundamental principles upon which galactic civilization is built. How do you plead? Sarah looked past the judge at the hundreds of peacekeepers, the sealed blast doors, the force fields humming with barely contained energy. All of this security, all of this fear, because humanity had a tendency to think outside the box. She smiled. Your Honor, humanity pleads not guilty by reason of being human. The judge's crystalline features shifted in what might have been confusion. That is not a recognized plea in galactic law? Then I guess we'll have to improvise. And in that moment, as ripples of nervous energy swept through the assembled beings, Sarah realized that the real trial hadn't even begun yet. The courtroom of the Galactic Court of Justice was unlike anything Sarah had ever imagined. The chamber stretched impossibly high, its walls composed of a translucent material that seemed to shift between dimensions. The floating platforms held representatives from dozens of species, each positioned according to ancient protocols that Sarah was only beginning to understand. The air itself hummed with translation fields, ensuring that every word spoken would be understood by every being present. Sarah sat at the defendant's table, a piece of furniture that had been hastily modified to accommodate human physiology. Beside her sat Dr. Elena Vasquez, Earth's foremost expert in galactic law, and Commander James Park, representing the United Earth Defense Force. Behind them, separated by a force field that shimmered like heat waves, sat the rest of the human delegation. The chief prosecutor, a being known as High Adjudicator Vexahi, rose from its platform. The creature resembled a massive crystalline spider, its multiple eyes reflecting the courtroom's ethereal light. When it spoke, its voice resonated with harmonic frequencies that made Sarah's bones ache. Honored justices of the court, we are here today to address a threat to galactic stability unlike any we have faced in our recorded history. The species, known as humans, in their brief 3 years as members of our union, have demonstrated a pattern of behavior that threatens the very foundations upon which our civilization rests. A holographic display materialized in the center of the courtroom, showing a 3-dimensional map of the galaxy with Earth highlighted in pulsing red. The evidence will show that these beings, despite their primitive technology and limited territorial holdings, have consistently violated established protocols through what they term innovation, but what we recognize as dangerous unpredictability. Sarah leaned forward, studying the display. Red markers appeared throughout human space, each one representing what the prosecution considered a violation of galactic norms. Let us begin with the incident at Colony Kepler 442b, approximately 18 standard months ago, Vexahe continued. The display zoomed in, showing a modest human settlement surrounded by the wreckage of what had once been a pirate fleet. A new voice filled the courtroom, translated from the original Kitharin through the court's universal systems. The speaker was Captain Thekdar, a grizzled warrior whose species was renowned for their military prowess. I was hired by the Crimson Nebula pirates to assess the human colony's defenses, Thekdar's testimony began. Standard reconnaissance showed a civilian population with minimal defensive capabilities, mining equipment, agricultural domes, basic power generators, no military installations, no weapon systems, no trained soldiers. The display showed detailed scans of the colony as it had existed before the attack. Sarah recognized the layout. It was typical of humanity's early colonial efforts, focused on survival and resource extraction rather than military preparedness. The pirate fleet consisted of 47 ships, veteran crews, and enough firepower to level the settlement in minutes. It should have been a simple raid. Take what was valuable, eliminate potential witnesses, move on. Standard operating procedure. Sarah felt her jaw clench. The casual way the Kithaeron discussed the planned massacre of civilians made her stomach turn, but she forced herself to remain calm. This was exactly the kind of attitude that made her proud of humanity's response. What happened next defied all military logic, Thekdar continued. Within 6 hours of our arrival, the humans had somehow weaponized their mining equipment. Designed for cutting rock were modified to punch through military-grade armor. Excavation charges were turned into guided missiles using modified communication satellites. The display showed the battle in real-time reconstruction. Sarah watched as her species' colonists turned their peaceful settlement into a fortress of improvised defenses. Mining mechs became mobile weapons platforms. Atmospheric processors generated clouds of obscuring vapor. Even the colony's waste management system was converted into some kind of projectile launcher. But that wasn't the worst of it. Thekdar's voice carried a note of what sounded like awe mixed with terror. They turned their agricultural domes into shield generators, not by installing new technology, but by somehow manipulating the electromagnetic fields used for crop growth. I've been a warrior for 60 years, and I've never seen anything like it. High Adjudicator Vexahe gestured toward the human delegation. The defense will undoubtedly claim this was merely a case of civilians defending themselves. But the evidence shows something far more disturbing. These humans didn't simply fight, they improvised solutions that shouldn't have been possible with their available resources. Dr. Gavimic Trust, Vasquez leaned over to whisper in Sarah's ear, "This isn't going as badly as it could. They're painting us as dangerous, but also as defensive rather than aggressive." Sarah nodded, but she was more focused on the reactions of the various species represented in the courtroom. Some seemed impressed by humanity's resourcefulness. Others appeared genuinely frightened. A few delegates from warrior species looked almost eager. "The prosecution calls its next witness," Vexhay announced. Ambassador Kilneth of the hegemony of Taldar, a reptilian being materialized on the witness platform via hologram. Its scales a deep emerald that shifted to darker hues as it prepared to speak. Sarah recognized the species from her briefings. The Taldar were conquerors, a civilization that had built their empire through military might and strategic brilliance. Ambassador Kilneth, the prosecutor began, "Please describe the incident at Ross D. 128B. The Taldari ambassador's voice carried the weight of wounded pride. The Ross 128B system contained resources vital to our expansion plans. The human colony was illegally occupying territory that rightfully belonged to the hegemony under the doctrine of proximate development. Sarah made a note. The doctrine of proximate development was a legal principle that allowed established galactic powers to claim systems within their sphere of influence. It was a controversial law that many species considered a relic of more aggressive times. Our fleet moved to establish lawful control of the system. Kilneth continued, 43 ships of the line, commanded by our most experienced admirals. We offered the human colonists standard terms, immediate evacuation with compensation for lost assets or enforcement through military action. And how did the humans respond? They refused evacuation and requested 72 hours to consider their options. The ambassador's tone suggested this was somehow insulting. We granted this time as a gesture of mercy, maintaining a standard blockade formation around the planet. The display showed the Taldari fleet in perfect military formation, surrounding the human colony like a noose. Sarah counted the ships and felt a chill. 43 warships against a handful of civilian vessels and a few hundred colonists. What happened during those 72 hours? The humans, they did things that are not possible according to established military doctrine. They turned their mining ships into something that our tactical computers couldn't classify. They created weapons out of terraforming equipment. They somehow generated defensive fields using modified life support systems. But surely your superior numbers and firepower were rendered irrelevant. The ambassador's admission was clearly painful. They didn't fight like any species we had encountered before. Instead of trying to match our military strength, they changed the nature of the battlefield itself. The display showed the battle's progression, and Sarah found herself impressed despite knowing the outcome. The human colonists hadn't tried to engage the Taldari fleet ship to ship. Instead, they had somehow turned the planet's asteroid mining operation into a defensive network, using modified equipment to create a field of obstacles that made it impossible for the larger ships to maneuver effectively. They used their waste processing systems to create a cloud of debris that interfered with our sensors, Kilneth continued, his voice growing more strained. They modified their atmospheric processors to generate electromagnetic pulses that disrupted our targeting systems. And somehow, impossibly, they turned their hydroponic farms into long-range communication arrays that allowed them to coordinate defenses across the entire system. Sarah glanced at Commander Park, who was struggling to hide a grin. The human military officer clearly appreciated the tactical innovation their colonists had displayed. The final straw, Kilneth said, was when they began broadcasting what they called surrender terms to our fleet. Not their surrender, ours. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Several of the warrior species leaned forward, clearly interested in this development. What were these terms? Immediate withdrawal from the system, formal recognition of human territorial claims, and... The ambassador paused, his scales now almost black with embarrassment. A written apology for the inconvenience, and your response, we withdrew from the system. The courtroom erupted in surprised chatter. High Adjudicator Vexe allowed the noise to continue for several moments before calling for order. Ambassador Kilneth, the prosecutor continued, in your military opinion, how were the humans able to defeat a force with such overwhelming superiority in numbers and firepower? They cheated, Kilneth said flatly. They treated warfare as if it were some kind of puzzle to be solved rather than a test of strength and will. Sarah felt Dr. Vasquez's hand on her arm, a warning to remain calm. But she was actually beginning to feel hopeful. The prosecution was making humanity sound dangerous, but they were also making them sound incredibly impressive. Your Honor, Vex Hay addressed the panel of judges. The prosecution submits that these incidents demonstrate a pattern of behavior that threatens galactic stability. The humans don't simply break rules, they seem incapable of recognizing that rules exist. They approach every situation as if established principles and protocols are merely suggestions to be ignored at will. The lead judge, the crystalline being who had first addressed Sarah at the dock, spoke for the first time since the trial began. With trust, Teddy, High Adjudicator, the court notes that in both instances you have described humans were acting in defense of their colonies and citizens. Are there examples of unprovoked human aggression? No, Your Honor. All documented incidents involve humans responding to external threats. However, the prosecution maintains that their methods of response demonstrate a fundamental incompatibility with galactic civilization. Please elaborate. Your Honor, galactic peace has been maintained for 10 millennia through adherence to established protocols. Warfare follows recognized patterns. Diplomacy operates according to ancient treaties. Technology develops along predictable lines. These principles allow us to maintain stability across thousands of species and millions of worlds. The prosecutor gestured toward the human delegation again. The humans ignore these principles entirely. They improvise solutions that shouldn't work. They create weapons from farming equipment and defensive systems from waste processors. They treat the impossible as merely improbable, and the improbable as inevitable. Sarah realized that Vex's High had just articulated something fundamental about humanity without realizing it. They weren't just describing human behavior. They were describing human nature. Furthermore, the prosecutor continued, preliminary analysis suggests that this behavior is not limited to military applications. Human colonies have shown innovation rates that exceed galactic averages by orders of magnitude. Their scientific development follows no recognizable patterns. Their social structures adapt and evolve in real time, rather than following established evolutionary models. One of the judges, a being that looked like a tree made of silver, spoke up. "Are you suggesting that innovation itself should be considered a crime?" "Your Honor, unchecked innovation is inherently destabilizing. The galaxy has prospered under systems that prioritize predictability and gradual, controlled progress. The human approach to problem solving threatens to undermine millions of years of careful development." Sarah stood up, unable to remain silent any longer. "Your Honor, may I respond to these charges?" The lead judge considered her request. "Ambassador Chen, you will have your opportunity to present your defense. However, if you wish to address a specific point raised by the prosecution, the court will allow it." "Thank you, Your Honor." Sarah moved to the center of the courtroom, aware that every being present was focused on her. "The prosecution has presented a series of incidents in which humans defended themselves against aggression. They've characterized our methods as cheating and rule-breaking. But I would ask the court to consider a different interpretation." She gestured toward the display, which still showed the aftermath of the Ross 128B incident. In every case the prosecution has described, humans were faced with impossible odds. Conventional wisdom said we should lose, surrender, or die, but we didn't. Not because we're inherently aggressive or warlike, but because we refuse to accept that any problem is truly unsolvable. Sarah noticed several delegates nodding slightly, particularly those from species that had faced their own struggles for survival. The prosecution fears our unpredictability, but I would submit that what they're really afraid of is hope. The hope that there's always another way, always another solution, always a chance to turn defeat into victory through creativity and determination. High Adjudicator. Vexhi's crystalline form seemed to bristle. "Ambassador Chen, hope is not on trial here. What concerns the court is—" "What concerns the court?" Sarah interrupted, then immediately apologized for the breach of protocol. "Is that we represent change in a galaxy that has grown comfortable with stagnation. You've had peace for 10,000 years, but at what cost? How many problems have gone unsolved because they didn't fit established patterns? How many species have suffered because conventional wisdom said their situations were hopeless?" The courtroom fell silent. Sarah realized she had just accused the entire galactic civilization of complacency, but she pressed on. "Your Honor, the prosecution keeps talking about our violations of established principles. But what if those principles are wrong? What if the galaxy's reliance on predictable patterns and ancient protocols has created more problems than it's solved?" She pointed to the evidence displays that still floated in the courtroom's center. "Every incident they've shown you has one thing in common. Humans refused to accept that victory was impossible. We didn't break your rules out of malice or aggression. We broke them because they were preventing us from protecting the people we care about." The lead judge leaned forward, its crystalline features reflecting the courtroom's light in complex patterns. "Ambassador Chen, are you suggesting that the principles that have maintained galactic peace for millennia should be abandoned?" "No, Your Honor, I'm suggesting they should be improved. The galaxy has achieved stability, but has it achieved justice? Has it achieved true security for all its members? Or has it simply created a system where the strong maintain order over the weak?" Sarah could see that her words were having an impact. Some delegates looked thoughtful, others appeared troubled, and a few seemed genuinely intrigued by her argument. "The evidence shows that humans don't follow established patterns," she continued. "But it also shows that we succeed where established patterns fail. Maybe the galaxy doesn't need to fear our unpredictability. Maybe it needs to embrace it." As she returned to her seat, Sarah caught sight of several beings in the observation galleries, members of species she didn't recognize, some taking notes, others engaged in quiet conversation. For the first time since arriving at the station, she began to feel like humanity might have allies they didn't know about. The trial was far from over, but the battle lines were becoming clear. On one side stood the established order, terrified of change and determined to preserve the status quo. On the other stood humanity, representing the possibility that there might be better ways to solve the galaxy's problems. The question now was whether the court would choose safety or progress, predictability or hope. As the session adjourned for deliberation, Sarah realized that the trial had become something much larger than a legal proceeding about human behavior. It had become a referendum on the future of galactic civilization itself. The second day of the trial began with an unexpected development. Sarah arrived at the courthouse to find the security presence had doubled overnight. Peacekeepers in full battle armor lined the corridors, and new defensive systems had been installed around the human delegation's quarters. "What's all this about?" Sarah asked Admiral Zaxthor as he escorted her through the enhanced security perimeter. "Word of yesterday's proceedings has spread throughout the station," the Admiral replied, his voice carrying a note of concern. "Several member species have requested private meetings with your delegation. Others have submitted formal requests to attend the trial as observers. This level of interest in a judicial proceeding is unprecedented." Sarah noticed the crowds gathering at observation points throughout the station. Beings from dozens of species watched their passage with expressions ranging from curiosity to open fascination. Some held what appeared to be recording devices, while others seemed to be taking notes. "Admiral, is that a problem?" "Ambassador, in my experience, when the galaxy starts paying attention to something this closely, it usually means change is coming. The question is whether that change will be peaceful or catastrophic." As they entered the courtroom, Sarah was surprised to see that the observer galleries had been expanded overnight. New platforms had been installed to accommodate the increased interest, and she could see representatives from species she didn't recognize filling the available spaces. Dr. Fido Frutti Vasquez was already at the defense table, reviewing what appeared to be a massive collection of new documents. "Sarah, we've been contacted by over 40 species requesting to testify on humanity's behalf. Apparently, yesterday's session has inspired quite a response." "What kind of response?" "The kind that has the prosecution very nervous," Commander Park added, nodding toward the prosecution table where High Adjudicator VXAI was engaged in what appeared to be an intense discussion with several other beings. The lead judge called the session to order, and Sarah noticed that the panel itself had been expanded. 2 additional judges had been added overnight, representing species she wasn't familiar with. "Before we proceed with the defense's case," the crystalline judge began, "the court must address several procedural matters. We have received formal requests from multiple member species to intervene in these proceedings. This is highly unusual for a case involving treaty violations." A new voice spoke from the expanded judge panel, a being that looked like a collection of glowing geometric shapes. "Your Honor, the Synthetic Collective requests permission to present evidence relevant to the charges against humanity." Sarah felt a chill. The Synthetic Collective was one of the galaxy's most advanced civilizations, composed entirely of artificial intelligences that had long ago transcended their organic origins. If they were taking an interest in this trial, the implications could be enormous. "The court recognizes the Synthetic Collective's representative. Please state your interest in these proceedings." "Your Honor, the collective has been monitoring human technological developments since first contact. Our analysis suggests that the prosecution's characterization of human innovation patterns is incomplete and potentially misleading." High Adjudicator VexAI rose immediately. "Your Honor, the prosecution objects to this intervention. The Synthetic Collective has no standing in matters of organic species behavior." "On the contrary," the geometric being replied, "the collective's analysis of innovation patterns across galactic history is precisely relevant to this case. We request permission to present our findings." The judges conferred for several minutes before the lead judge spoke again. "The court will allow the Synthetic Collective to present evidence subject to cross-examination by the prosecution. Proceed." The courtroom's central display activated, showing what appeared to be a complex 3-dimensional chart tracking technological development across the galaxy over the past 50,000 years. The prosecution has characterized human innovation as chaotic and unpredictable, the collective's representative began. Our analysis suggests otherwise. Observe the patterns of technological advancement among major galactic civilizations. The display zoomed in on different sections of the chart, highlighting the development curves of various species. Sarah noticed that most showed gradual, steady progression with occasional plateaus but few dramatic leaps.
Note the consistency of these patterns.
Each species follows a predictable development arc, with innovation rates that remain relatively constant across millennia. This predictability has indeed contributed to galactic stability. Then how do you explain human behavior? The lead judge asked. Humans do not represent chaos, Your Honor. They represent acceleration. The display shifted to show humanity's development curve, and Sarah gasped audibly. Instead of the gradual slopes characteristic of other species, the human line showed exponential growth that seemed to defy the chart's scale. In 3 standard years, humans have demonstrated innovation rates that exceed the galactic average by a factor of 1,200. However, this is not random or chaotic behavior. It follows a distinct pattern that the collective has identified in our historical databases. What pattern? Dr. Vasquez whispered, leaning forward intently. The pattern of a species approaching a technological singularity, the collective's representative replied. We have identified 17 similar cases in our records, though none at quite this acceleration rate. The courtroom erupted in surprised murmurs. The concept of technological singularity was theoretical for most organic species, the point at which technological growth becomes so rapid that it fundamentally transforms the nature of existence itself. Your Honor, Vexahay interjected, this supports the prosecution's case. If humans are approaching technological singularity, they represent an even greater threat to galactic stability. Perhaps, the collective replied, or perhaps they represent the galaxy's next evolutionary step. The trial had just taken on implications she hadn't even considered. They weren't just defending humanity's right to exist in galactic society. They were potentially discussing the future of intelligence itself. The collective's analysis indicates that human innovation patterns, while rapid, are not destructive, the geometric being continued. In fact, they show remarkable restraint and ethical consideration. Despite their technological acceleration, humans have shown no inclination toward conquest or domination. But their unpredictability, Vexahay began, is the natural result of exponential rather than linear thinking. Humans don't break rules randomly. They transcend limitations systematically. This is precisely what one would expect from a species approaching singularity. The lead judge studied the display intently. Synthetic collective, in your analysis, what are the implications of humanity's continued development at this rate? Unknown, Your Honor, but the collective believes the potential benefits far outweigh the risks. The galaxy has been essentially stagnant for 10 millennia. Human innovation could catalyze a new era of growth and development for all species. Sarah stood up, requesting permission to address the court. When granted, she moved to the central area, feeling the weight of history on her shoulders. Your Honor, the collective's analysis confirms something we've known about ourselves all along. We don't think like other species, but I would argue that this isn't something to fear. She gestured toward the development chart still floating in the courtroom's center. The prosecution keeps talking about the stability that predictable development has brought to the galaxy. But look at these charts. Look at the flat lines, the plateaus, the periods where entire civilizations stopped growing, stopped learning, stopped dreaming. Sarah moved closer to the judge panel. Your Honor, humanity didn't choose to be different. We didn't set out to disrupt galactic civilization or threaten established order. We simply approached problems the way our species has always approached them, with the belief that every challenge can be overcome, every limitation can be transcended, every impossible situation has a solution waiting to be discovered. But at what cost? Interrupted a judge Sarah hadn't heard speak before, a being that resembled a living crystal formation. Rapid change brings instability. Instability leads to conflict. Conflict threatens the peace we have maintained for millennia. Does it, Your Honor? Or does stagnation lead to a different kind of conflict? The slow decay of hope, the gradual acceptance that things cannot improve, the quiet despair of civilizations that have stopped believing in their own potential. Every species represented here has stories of great achievements, moments when they overcame impossible odds, times when they transcended their limitations. But when was the last time any of you did something truly new? When did you last solve a problem that conventional wisdom said was unsolvable? She could see her words having an impact. Some delegates looked thoughtful, others uncomfortable, but all seemed engaged. The prosecution fears our unpredictability because it threatens the comfortable certainty they've built their civilization on. But I would ask you to consider what we've actually done with our supposed dangerous innovations. The display shifted at Dr. Vasquez's prompting, showing new images of human colonies and settlements. We've used our technological acceleration to heal damaged ecosystems, to create sustainable colonies that work in harmony with their environments, to develop medical treatments that have already been shared with 17 different species. We've turned instruments of war into tools of creation, weapons into shields, engines of destruction into engines of hope. Sarah paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. The collective is right. Humanity is approaching something unprecedented. But we're not approaching it alone. Every innovation we develop, every breakthrough we achieve, every impossible solution we discover gets shared with the entire galactic community. Our acceleration becomes everyone's acceleration. High Adjudicator Vex High rose to object. Your Honor, the defendant's optimistic projections don't address the fundamental issue of destabilization. Rapid change, regardless of its benefits, threatens the established order. And what if the established order needs to be threatened? The voice came from the observer gallery, and Sarah turned to see a being she recognized from her diplomatic briefings, Ambassador Curiel of the Ethereal Dominion, one of the galaxy's oldest and most respected civilizations. The lead judge looked surprised. Ambassador Curiel, you have not been recognized to speak. With respect, Your Honor, recent events have prompted my government to reassess our position on this matter. The Ethereal Dominion formally requests permission to present testimony relevant to these proceedings. The judges conferred briefly before granting permission. Ambassador Curiel descended from the observer gallery to the witness platform, moving with the fluid grace characteristic of her species. Your Honor, the Dominion has existed for over 40,000 years. We have seen the rise and fall of countless civilizations, witnessed the birth of the current galactic order, and helped establish many of the protocols and principles now under discussion.
The Ethereal Dominion's support could be decisive, but their testimony could also go either way. In our long existence, we have observed that civilizations face a critical choice at certain points in their development.
They can choose stability and gradual decline, or they can choose growth and accept the risks that come with change. Ambassador Curiel gestured toward the human delegation. The galaxy chose stability 10,000 years ago. It has served us well, but the cost has been higher than we initially realized. Innovation has slowed to a crawl. Scientific advancement has plateaued. Entire species have lost their sense of wonder and possibility. But surely, Vexe interjected, the peace and stability we've achieved justify these costs. Do they? Curiel replied. Your Honor, in the past 1,000 years, how many major scientific breakthroughs has the galaxy achieved? How many new frontiers have been explored? How many impossible problems have been solved? The courtroom fell silent as the implications of her questions sank in. The answer, Your Honor, is essentially none. We have achieved stability by accepting stagnation. We have maintained peace by abandoning progress. Curiel moved closer to the judge panel. 3 years ago, humanity joined our community. In that brief time, they have achieved more genuine innovation than the rest of the galaxy has managed in the past millennium. They have shown us that our choice between stability and progress was a false dichotomy. How so? The lead judge asked. Because true stability comes not from avoiding change, but from successfully managing it. Humanity has demonstrated that rapid innovation need not lead to chaos if it is guided by ethical principles and a commitment to the common good. Sarah felt a surge of gratitude toward the ethereal ambassador, but she also realized that the stakes of the trial had just been raised even higher. Furthermore, Curiel continued, the Dominion has identified several critical challenges facing galactic civilization that our traditional approaches have failed to address. Climate degradation on 17 worlds, resource depletion in the outer sectors, and the emergence of new forms of synthetic intelligence that don't fit our existing legal frameworks. The Synthetic Collective's representatives spoke up. The Dominion is correct. These challenges require innovative solutions that transcend current limitations. Your Honor, Curiel concluded, humanity doesn't just offer us new ways to solve old problems. They offer us hope that problems can be solved at all. After 40,000 years of existence, the Dominion has learned that this hope is the most precious resource in the galaxy. As Ambassador Curiel returned to the observer gallery, Sarah realized that the trial had become something far larger than anyone had anticipated. It wasn't just about humanity's place in galactic civilization, it was about whether that civilization was willing to embrace change, growth, and the possibility of a better future. The prosecution looked increasingly isolated as more species began to see humanity not as a threat, but as an opportunity. But Sarah knew that the most dangerous opponents were often those with the most to lose from change. The real question wasn't whether humanity would be found guilty or innocent. The real question was whether the galaxy was ready to stop playing it safe and start reaching for the impossible once again. As the session adjourned, Sarah caught sight of dozens of beings in the observer galleries engaged in intense discussions. Representatives from species she'd never heard of were taking notes, making recordings, and clearly planning their next moves. The trial of humanity had become a catalyst for something much larger, a galactic awakening that could change the course of civilization itself. The third day of the trial began with chaos. Sarah awoke to find the corridors outside their quarters filled with beings from dozens of species, all clamoring for attention. Some held signs in various alien scripts. Others were broadcasting what appeared to be news reports in languages the translation systems couldn't process fast enough. "What's happening?" Sarah asked Admiral Zaxthor as he pushed through the crowd to reach her. "Word of the trial has spread beyond the station," he replied grimly. "We're receiving communications from across the galaxy. Some species are calling for humanity to be granted full technological development rights immediately. Others are demanding your immediate expulsion from the Union. And a few," he paused, looking troubled, "a few are mobilizing military fleets." "Military fleets? For what purpose?" "Unknown. But the hegemony of Taldar has declared a state of military readiness, claiming they need to protect themselves from potential human unpredictability. The Catheran Confederacy has announced they're sending a diplomatic mission that happens to include 3 battle groups, and 17 minor species have formally requested human technological assistance, effective immediately. As they made their way through the station, Sarah could see the changes that had occurred overnight. New ships were arriving hourly, their occupants adding to the growing crowd of observers. The peaceful judicial station was transforming into something that looked more like a galactic summit. "Admiral, has anything like this ever happened before?" "Never." The most watched trial in galactic history involved a territorial dispute that affected 12 systems. This trial is generating interest from species that haven't participated in galactic affairs for centuries. When they reached the courtroom, Sarah was amazed to see that it had been expanded again. Additional judge platforms had been added, and the observer galleries now stretched up several more levels. She counted representatives from at least 60 different species, many of whom she didn't recognize from her diplomatic training. Dr. Vasquez was waiting at the defense table with a concerned expression. "Sarah, we need to talk before the session begins. We've received some disturbing intelligence about what's really behind these charges." They moved to a private consultation area where Commander Park was reviewing what appeared to be classified documents on a secured tablet. "What kind of intelligence?" Sarah asked. "The kind that suggests this trial isn't really about treaty violations," Commander Park replied. "According to sources in the Galactic intelligence community, there's a faction within the Union leadership that's been planning this for months." Vasquez pulled up a holographic display showing the political structure of the Galactic Union. The current leadership consists primarily of what they call the Stability Council species that have held power for millennia and have the most to lose from rapid change. They've been watching humanity's development with growing alarm. But why the trial? Trust Teddy. Why not just approach us diplomatically? "Because they needed legal justification for what they're planning," Commander Park said grimly. "If humanity is found guilty of threatening galactic stability, the Stability Council gains the authority to impose what they're calling developmental limitations on our species." Sarah felt her blood run cold. What kind of limitations? Complete restriction of technological development, mandatory oversight of all human colonies, and, Dr. Vasquez hesitated, isolation from the rest of galactic society until we prove we can develop along acceptable lines. "They want to put us in a cage," Sarah said flatly. "Essentially, yes. But here's the thing. I don't think they anticipated the response the trial would generate. They expected a quiet proceeding that would rubber stamp their predetermined verdict. Instead, they've created a galactic debate about the future of civilization itself." Before Sarah could respond, the courtroom chimes announced the beginning of the session. As they returned to their seats, she noticed that High Adjudicator Vexehai looked distinctly uncomfortable, surrounded by what appeared to be advisors who were whispering urgently in his ear. The lead judge called for order, but it took several minutes for the expanded courtroom to settle down. "Before we proceed with today's testimony," the crystalline judge began, "the court must address the unprecedented situation that has developed around these proceedings. We have received formal requests from over 100 species to intervene in this case. Several member civilizations have declared states of heightened alert, and most concerning, we have reports of military mobilizations in multiple sectors." Teddy. A new voice spoke from the expanded judge panel, a being Sarah didn't recognize, whose form seemed to shift between different configurations of light and energy. "Your Honor, the Ascended Collective has monitored these proceedings with growing concern. We believe the court may not fully understand the implications of the charges being considered." Sarah leaned forward. The Ascended Collective was legendary, a group of species that had supposedly transcended physical existence centuries ago. If they were taking an interest in the trial, it meant the stakes were even higher than she had realized. "Please elaborate," the lead judge requested. "The charges against humanity appear to be standard treaty violations. However, the true nature of this trial involves a fundamental question about the direction of galactic evolution itself." The ascended being's form solidified slightly as it continued. "The galaxy stands at a crossroads. One path leads to continued stability through controlled stagnation. The other leads to accelerated development through managed innovation. The treatment of humanity will determine which path the galaxy chooses." High Adjudicator Vexehai rose quickly. "Your Honor, the prosecution objects to this characterization. We are simply addressing violations of established law. Are you?" The interruption came from yet another new arrival, a being that Sarah recognized as Ambassador Thane of the warrior clans, a confederation of species known for